Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond is a 2017 American documentary film directed by Chris Smith. The film follows actor Jim Carrey as he remains in character as Andy Kaufman during the production of the 1999 film Man on the Moon, which was directed by Milos Forman. Now, I have a lot to say about this documentary, and it's going to be a lot of negative things that I have to say about Jim Carrey. So, before we go into it, let's do the synopsis first of the documentary. The documentary alternates between contemporary interviews with Jim Carrey and the first-hand footage of the making of Man on the Moon almost 20 years earlier. According to Carrey, Universal Pictures had withheld the behind-the-scenes footage so that people wouldn't think that Jim Carrey was an asshole, and that's in quotes. The basic premise is that while making the film, Carrey is so committed to the role of being Andy Kaufman, he had difficulty separating himself from that character, basically doing method acting the whole entire time. Jim Carrey's performance becomes so real that people who had known Andy Kaufman, even family and others close to him, felt like that they had actually been with him once again. And this is the problem that I have with the documentary. So, in the interviews that they have with Jim Carrey, when he was given the role, he thought, well, this is how he explains it, is that Andy Kaufman channeled himself spiritually through Jim Carrey, and that it wasn't just Jim Carrey becoming Andy Kaufman through acting, it was actually Andy Kaufman using Jim Carrey's body. And I thought this was absolutely absurd, as it's completely delusional, and gives Jim Carrey an excuse to really excuse much of his terrible, awful behavior that he was on set, on Universal lot, when he was working with the other actors, and especially when he was working with the director, Milos Forman. There's scenes when he's in character as either Andy Kaufman or as another character, Tony Clifton, where he's just completely being annoying, obnoxious, rude, loud, stupid around his other actors, which include Danny DeVito, Paul Giamatti, and other people who actually worked with Andy Kaufman who are starring in the film Man on the Moon. You could see with them, they are not really dealing with this very well, as they have to put up with this every single day of making this movie. So now they have to deal with the stress itself of just being an actor during this film production, but also with this obnoxious asshole Jim Carrey being Andy Kaufman the whole time, acting almost like a child in a way. And you really, through watching this documentary and seeing it going back and forth between Jim Carrey explaining himself in the interviews, and then it cuts back to the footage of him acting like an ass on the set of the production of Man of the Moon, you really start to develop this negative opinion of Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey, I know a lot of people see him as an intelligent person, as very smart, as a very good actor, but growing up, while I saw him when I was a child as a funny actor, over time I did not like his acting going forward. The only film that I feel like is his best movie is really The Truman Show. Everything else is pretty mediocre now that I'm looking back on it, and especially now after seeing this documentary, it really bothers me that people have to put up with this dude and that he has his head up his own ass a lot of times. And that's really just showcases how the studio system is in Hollywood. You have this obnoxious actor who really is doing all these stupid stunts. For example, there was a scene in the documentary where he's driving a car and he rams into a building. He's messing with the other crew members. He's messing with the assistants. And also, he is messing with a lot of the people who had worked with Andy Kaufman. For example, Jerry Lawler, the wrestler who did work with Andy Kaufman doing the performances back in the 70s, he kept messing with him acting as Andy Kaufman. There's a scene where Jerry Lawler is so pissed off with Jim Carrey doing this act that he actually injures him in a wrestling stunt intentionally. It just surprises me that people had to deal with this. And also it makes me sick that as you're watching this documentary, over and over, Jim Carrey is excusing his behavior continually, saying that, oh, Andy Kaufman was being channeled through him. The other character of Tony Clifton that Andy Kaufman would do was channeling through him. He was not acting anymore. He was basically these human beings. And when you see him interact with the actual family members of Andy Kaufman, and he's telling these people that he's actually Andy Kaufman, it's pretty sickening in my opinion, and it makes him even more of an asshole. Even though at the end of the documentary they try to edit it in a way and put it together that, oh, all together, the crew, the actors, they put it up with it, they were fine with it, they had a good time, the Man on the Moon came out very well, so his behavior might have been over the top, but at least things were settled and not much bad happened overall. It's like, no, of course not. Like, his behavior was despicable in many ways. There's a part in the documentary where he actually storms the offices of Steven Spielberg, just bothering the assistants, bothering the secretary, being as annoying as hell with other people. And to me, watching this and seeing Milos Forman, the director, having to put up with this when he's talking to Jim Carrey, being forced to address Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman, as if he's really there, pisses me off. And people will say, well, this is part of the method acting process, which is complete nonsense in a way, because if you're just making that as an excuse of saying, well, I was just the character the whole entire time, anybody could say that. Of saying, well, this is my process. Being an obnoxious asshole is a part of the process. Now, if you were to ask me what my thoughts are of Andy Kaufman himself, I see that his skits, his stunts that he did back in the 1970s, all the kind of comedic, I guess, sketches and skits that he did for people was unique at the time, as it was somewhat absurdist and new compared to what the type of comedy that existed at that time in the late 70s on late night television wasn't that funny in comparison to Andy Kaufman. Now, growing up, I didn't watch Andy Kaufman. I didn't really much know about him. It was not even until I saw the film Man on the Moon that I really knew that much about the dude's life. So I don't find him that unique. I don't find him that funny. It was funny at the time in the 70s and the 80s, but to me, watching it now, looking back, it's not really that spectacular. But I feel that Andy Kaufman is a far better comedian or a comedic actor than Jim Carrey could ever be honest with you. Jim Carrey, to me, now seems more and more just a narcissist. Seems now more like he needs people to stroke his ego. He needs people to put up with him being a child when he's doing these bits, being ridiculous, being loud, and he can get away with it. And to me, I would say that's what's great about the documentary, is it reveals some aspect of Jim Carrey that they tried to keep hidden away. Universal Pictures withheld that footage for good reason. At that time, Jim Carrey's career was blowing up. I think before this film, he did The Truman Show. Before that, he did The Mask, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, and his career exploded at that moment. So releasing footage of him being an asshole on set, I think would have just made his career stall or get worse because of a public opinion turning against Jim Carrey. But seeing this footage now, seeing the documentary, I think really is good in the sense of it just shows how much of a fucking asshole Jim Carrey can be, and how much of a deluded person he can be as well. I remember at the end of the documentary, there were times where he kept repeating, oh, you know, Andy was going through me, Tony Clifton, I was doing all these characters, I was becoming these characters. And then he said, well, you know, when my behavior went over the line, was it me, was it not me, you know, I don't know what to say. And I'm thinking, quit acting here, quit lying to people, quit being dishonest. Because we know that you were just having people be forced to put up with your bullshit. And to me, I'm thinking, fuck you. I don't care how great of an actor you think you are. Because Man on the Moon, when the film came out, and I remember watching it, thinking that it was a adequate movie, an adequate biopic about Andy Kaufman. There was nothing stellar about his performance. So his method acting process didn't amount to fucking much, to be honest with you. Didn't amount to much of anything. Because here, it's an adequate, okay movie. And so, does that mean method acting in the sense that Jim Carrey was utilizing method acting worked out? I don't think so. So, yeah, check out this documentary and you will see how much of a prick Jim Carrey was on the set of this film. It didn't, in the interviews, he didn't show or say, like, he didn't act like he was sort of regretting anything of it. He was just like, oh yeah, it happened and so what? Didn't apologize for any of his behavior, nothing. And that's what I think was here in the 20 years between the making of that film and the making of this documentary where he's interviewed. I'm thinking you would probably want to reflect and say, hey, yeah, my behavior was pretty terrible at that time. But he doesn't really say that in this documentary, to be honest with you. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think of this documentary. Yeah, I know I'm a little bit angry in this review, but talking about this dude kind of pisses me off after watching it. And let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you like Jim Carrey, if you think his acting, his method acting was justified, please let me know. Hope you guys like this documentary. I don't know if you'll have a better opinion of Jim Carrey after this or a worse opinion. Let me know what you think. Please like and subscribe. And like always, have a wonderful day.